All right, we're here with another episode of From the Source, and I have an awesome guest here coming from Canada, Leanne Courtney. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure. Hi, everyone.
And Leanne's coming from ProCom, and she is a business applications manager there. So, again, in these short form webinar series, you can't get any questions wrong. We're learning about you, your journey to where you've gotten to, things you're seeing in the industry, and yeah, people can learn about you and take away some learning. So it's a great opportunity to meet new people, and we're just lucky to have you here. So I like to get started with, well, first of all, where are you from? I think we talked about your accent a little bit previously. So where are you from originally, and how did you end up in Canada?
Yeah, so originally I'm from a little town or a big town called Melbourne, Australia. So
okay. The Australian Open is there actually, the tennis tournament?
Yeah,
right?
in January.
Yeah.
Cool. And so, yeah, I was born in Melbourne, and then I lived in France for a year when I was 15. So sometimes, I have some French mannerisms that come out in my English. And then I moved to the UK in 2013, and I lived in London, in Clapham with all the other Aussies. And then I moved to Montreal in 2018, and now I'm based in Toronto. So
got it. Okay, what was your favorite city out of all of those, if you can have one?
Oh my gosh, you're asking me to choose between like my
and also I might be potentially asking you to like turn your back on your homeland. So like this might be tough for you to answer.
I like them all for different reasons. London, I feel like, is such an eclectic mix of people. So I really enjoyed London, but I'm loving Toronto. I love the snow. I'm such a dog because we never really had snow in Melbourne. So I really like when it snows. I'm probably the only person in Canada who likes when it snows because I'm like, oh, wow.
I know, right? Everyone in Canada's tired of it.
So I like Toronto a lot as well. It's very similar to Melbourne. Melbourne probably has the best food in the world, I would say.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I like them all for different reasons. That's a really diplomatic answer.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. I think we're like a politician here with that answer. No, that makes sense. Our UK contingent here at SourceFlow would love that answer, that you have some cities there dear to your heart.
Yeah. I actually did a test, a DNA test. I'm 99.98% British. So there you go.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're automatically part of our family to an extent. I love that.
The hair gives it away.
Yeah. Great background. So I like to start with, since this is, we're in staffing and recruiting now, we talk about careers all the time with people and amongst ourselves. What was your first job? I'd love to learn a little bit about where you started and then kind of your journey to how you got to ProCom.
Yeah. So my first job is pretty unglamorous, but I used to work in an ice cream shop when I was 14, was my first job.
I love that.
I used to make those ice creams, like that look like clowns and stuff with like a banana nose and like, choc chips for eyes and things like that.
So you developed some craftsmanship there, I guess.
I'm not the most creative, but yeah, I did my best.
That's amazing.
So yeah, I did that before I left for France when I was 15. And then after that, I worked through university in a pretty big like pastry shop in Melbourne. And then like I was doing my studies in criminology and French. And then when I finished that, I actually got offered a management position for that pastry shop. A small one that was in my suburb. It wasn't too far. And then I did pretty well there. So after 3 months, the bosses offered me a new store they were opening that earned like over 1.5 million, because at the time was a lot. As a pastry,
you weren't baking. You were managed. You were on the business side. You were managing. Okay, because I've been watching the Great British Baking Show, and there's always like a patisserie week, and so like it's like those are really hard to make. So okay.
I mean, as I said, I'm not the most creative, but I sold the cakes.
Okay, great.
Like the flower arrangements and the ribbon arrangements and things like that. But then when I moved into management, it was more about like managing the day-to-day operations. And then after that, I worked in a 5-star hotel in Melbourne. Then, as I said, I moved to Europe or London, and I traveled around Europe for a couple of months. And then I started working at the Ritz. So I was doing, once again, like daily operations management at the Ritz London. Then after that, I moved into a high-end steakhouse, and I was a manager there.
Yeah.
Then after that, I moved to Canada. Really, now that I'm telling you everything, I'm like, wow, I've lived like 4 lives.
Yeah,
But,
that's a lot already. I think this is great self-reflection.
yeah, it really is.
Really.
It's a great exercise to be like, wow, I've
Yeah.
done some stuff. And so when I moved to Montreal, I started doing a lot of translation. As I said before, I speak French. So
Yeah.
Montreal's a bilingual city, and there's always a need to have someone who speaks French and English. And with my degree in French, I did a lot of translation studies and content revision and things like that, which led me to the staffing industry.
Yeah.
So I moved just before COVID. I moved into a role where I was like formatting CVs, revising a lot of content for a staffing agency.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got quite bored of that after 3 months, and I like hounded my VP to do something else. And I was like, okay, I know I'm like more analytical than this and critical thinker and whatever. So I basically pushed my way in to be their bullhorn admin.
Okay.
And then after that, I met my current company at Engage, Bullhorn Engage, and now I look after about 23 different business applications here at ProCom. So
wow,
quite a journey.
That quite a journey. Yeah. And we have our shared kind of history there. I mean, I worked at Bullhorn for a while, and that's how I got my start in technology sales back in 2018. And you kind of found your way into that world. Eventually.
I'll push my way. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's. I'm finding some trends here. You know, with successful women in the industry. You know, our friend Carolyn Durant started in a candy shop, and was in, the services industry for a long time. And you were in the services industry essentially for a really long time, just from place to place, though, like hospitality to then the restaurant and the Ritz.
It really helps today too to have all that service background, because a lot of my job is helping people and making sure that I solve the problem. And Carolyn's actually very good at that as well. So it carries through, even if we're working in tech. If you have a great customer obsessed background or customer service background, it can really make you better at your role. I think sometimes tech people can be a little bit too focused on the facts, if you will, but that human empathy element really helps you get adoption when you're implementing new tech and making people feel like, it's a problem that I can solve, really making them comfortable.
I wonder also if there's like a parallel with, you're not really shy about kind of facing problems, I guess, because I mean, in the services industry, especially in like hotels and restaurants, like, challenging customers, like, crazy situations, I'd have to imagine, right? And then like that must prepare you for some kind of scenarios here, and not, kind of solutioning and trying to not back away from problematic scenarios. Or
you're absolutely right. We probably could do a whole podcast just on service industry. Maybe we can invite Carolyn and we'll do
that would be great.
Service industry stories. But I think where the experience of hotels and hospitality come into play in my role is everything is important and urgent, and it's about you managing expectations in that, and not like feeling like you're just shrugging it off and saying, well, can't solve for it. Because when you've got a guest in front of you at a hotel or in a restaurant and they want their things now, that's a really key piece, right? Like you have to make sure that they feel like you care about what they're going through. And that carries over into this role as well, and probably in your role a lot as well, to make sure that people feel like they are heard and that you're solving a problem for them. Yeah,
absolutely. I think in sales, especially like these days, I think too many sales reps or account manager reps might be kind of shying away from those difficult conversations versus kind of taking, and you would probably face this every day because you're on the opposite end of it, right? Versus like, hey, let's get on the phone and talk about it. And like, how much, I guess my question to you is, how much of it in those difficult conversations is like managing expectations or just communicating, even if it's bad news? Like,
I think it's a lot of managing expectations, but a key element that I think we've lost is sincerity in our communication, and being really transparent and say, look, I don't know how to solve for it, but I'm going to try and find a solution. I'm pretty down to earth, as you know, we've met before. And I'm pretty, I can smell if someone's trying to dodge a question or like trying to smooth it over. I think being sincere and open and saying, look, I don't know the perfect thing is going to help you connect, right? And especially these days, I get approached a lot by vendors, and I can see when it's an automatic email compared to when it's a real person who's written something. And sincerity is really the key there, whether you're solving a problem or whether you're trying to make a new connection. I think we've lost that a little bit. It'll be interesting with AI how that's going to all play out, but people are looking for that human connection after COVID, after AI. I think people can stand out, whether it's in their day-to-day job like mine or whether you're trying to find a new customer, by being themselves and not trying to craft the perfect message or the perfect solution or the perfect answer. It's just got to be you and say, like, I don't know all the answers.
Yeah, exactly. A lot. I mean, look, we're all human, right? And I think to your point, if you kind of have that vulnerability in certain scenarios, people are like, okay, great. Like, we don't expect you to know. Instead of like making stuff up, right? I mean, people can gauge that. And I think the more virtual world, like less in-person meetings, which hopefully we get back to that a little bit more. But I think that's probably had an impact too. And maybe some people aren't as good over virtual meetings or things like that. But
I can see that. But I think, like, once again, you're pretty down to earth, as am I. We had a really great conversation before. We're having another great conversation now because we're ourselves. I don't think we're following a script. We're not trying to be something that we're not. So as long as you just, I know it sounds like super cliche, like just be yourself and everything's going to be fine. But we really need to get back to that, I think, whether you're selling, whether you're looking after customers, whether you're trying to solve a problem, like level 1 support. If we can just not try and be so perfect all the time, I think we can make a better world.
I love that takeaway. I really do. So as your job now, business applications manager, you talk about, when our previous conversation, you said not really the tech stack. I like to look at it as a digital ecosystem. So tell me about how you got to that digital ecosystem and kind of types of tools you're managing on a day-to-day there.
Yeah, I mean, luckily we still have a bit of time because this is exactly what I love to talk about. What I like about this image of an ecosystem is it's not a stack on top of each other. It's really like a web, and that things are connecting with each other and talking to each other. Tech stack, I think, is a little bit linear, whereas how I see my digital ecosystem is there's different tools that need to talk to different pieces of the puzzle. And so it's about trying, I think sometimes we get a little bit too stuck of trying to identify exactly what the problem is, but more like, okay, what is my overall outcome that I want to achieve? And what do I need tech to look after versus what do I need humans to look after? So as an example, I need a database to store all of my key information. So we have, at ProCom, we use Bullhorn. And then I might need something that's going to help automate emails, but that doesn't take away from the salesperson's personality or the recruiter's personality. So I'm going to look for a solution. What connects into my core system, which in this case is Bullhorn, and what can I automate in that person's day-to-day life so that they're not spending 6 hours trying to craft the perfect email, like what we were talking about before. And then I'm going to look at, okay, I need some data cleanup, and then I need somewhere to source my candidates. And the digital ecosystem starts having little footprints everywhere. Then the key piece is to have the thread connect those footprints in. If you don't have systems that talk to each other, you're destined for failure, really. If the person, you're trying to make the user's life easier. And if the person is going, well, I've got to go into this system, then I've got to come out of this system, go into that system and do this, and then go back into the other system in order to complete the action. That's my point, right? Like, you need that web and those threads to connect your footprints into your core beating heart. So the way that I see in a digital ecosystem, you have at least 3, in the staffing industry, I should say, you have 3 core pieces of your digital ecosystem. So you have your ATS CRM, whether they're separate or in the same. You have your back office, and then you should have something for onboarding as well. And then in your back office, you connect up your financing piece as well. After that, anything extra needs to be able to talk to those 4 systems. So not all of them, but depending on, like, something like automated messaging, it doesn't need to talk to the back office. But something like a timekeeping tool, maybe it needs to talk to all 4. And that's my job, is like, okay, where does this fit into my ecosystem, and does it need to serve multiple purposes, or can it just serve its sole purpose and then connect into the ATS, or does it need to go into all four?
Yeah.
So I'm rambling. Please.
No, this is great. No, I think that you hit on it. We could have a whole podcast about your tech stack. I mean, and have multiple episodes about it probably, right? Because you said, I really like that terminology because it is an ecosystem nowadays. The old days of like, oh, we have tech here, tech there, like not really. Tech, I mean, we have this web, we have main pieces in the middle, mission critical software, but then we have all this other tools that we need to help make a productive and efficient team overall. But guess what? We need that data to be flowing amongst each other, so everyone has visibility into it, and then leadership has insight into a lot of the data, the right data at the right time.
Exactly.
And I think to your point, now you're the business applications manager. I think some people underestimate how much work it is you're talking about 15 to 20 tools. Like that's a lot of work. I mean, I think a lot of tech is trying to consolidate that so you can buy one tool and then have it all, but I'm not sure we're quite there yet. But your main job is to actually make sure that works so that like the recruiters and salespeople can still have a great human touch and you guys can differentiate amongst yourself. Right?
Yeah, it's a really great point. Funnily enough, I don't think there's a lot of my position out there in staffing firms or even in healthcare or legal, but it is super important to have that person who has a 360 view of what's going on from a tech perspective. Often we identify the IT team as looking after our emails. Okay, but that's one part of the business. What we're really looking at is how does this whole machine function? And so I encourage anyone listening, if they don't have a role like mine, you really need one. If you want to have a successful tech stack, not just tech stack digital ecosystem. Now you've got me changing.
Oh, I know, I got you changing. No, it's okay.
You need that person not only to choose the correct tech, to implement the tech, but also to help with adoption, right? And to help with support, because it's overwhelming. As I said, we have 23 different ones. It's like, where do I start? What do I need to learn more? How can I learn more? We can all direct people to documentation online, but that human touch really drives adoption in my experience.
Yeah. And I think I spent a few years outside of staffing and recruiting, and I think staffing recruiting has been a couple of years behind the trends, but I think it's catching up. And I think more roles like yours are popping up, and rightfully so, because people do need to know the tech that is in the business and is being utilized properly. Also, that they're not creating a bloated tech stack, right? Where there's redundant tools, overspending. Hey, sales goes and buys a tool and without consulting you, and it doesn't integrate to anything. And then now they're into a 2-year, 3-year contract. So actually this segues into a perfect question that I want to ask. What is your process for evaluating new tools? There's so many tools out in the market. I guess, what are the biggest trends you're seeing in tech, and like, what's your process for evaluating new technology?
So I really try hard to activate that left brain and stay in the analytical space and not the shiny new syndrome space, because it's very easy to fall into that, go, wow, this is so cool. This looks modern. This does this. But you really have to bring it back and go, like, what do I already have? Is this replacing something that I already have, as well as like creating another feature that I'm missing? Or is this just the new product of the season and I want to see it develop a little bit more? There's some key questions that I ask when I'm meeting with vendors. I want to see their roadmap. Like, I want to see that they're still investing in developing the product, and that they're not just stagnating and saying we have a great product and, maybe we'll do some UI improvements once in a while. I really want to understand what they're doing. And on that note, partnering with them. One thing that's super important is making sure that your customers have a voice when it comes to what they want to see in the product, because they use it every single day.
Right.
No offense, Christian, but you're never going to be in the position where you're logging the tickets and so you can't understand the product on that side. And so I think giving your customers a voice, and if I feel that in the call, I'm much more willing to adopt that type of technology than a really like corporate, we can't do anything, black hole of product where
hey, just submit this request. We'll get to it at some point.
Exactly. So I think that's really key. Another key piece, particularly if you're constructing an ecosystem, is ensuring that it can connect with your core mission critical, as you put it, systems, because if it can't, then you're going to fall into the custom API development, which is fine. But just if you make that decision, like, it is a lot of effort, it's a lot of financial input, it's maintenance. So you need to make sure that you have the resources to maintain that custom API. It's not just a one and done type of deal. So that's another key component that I look for. I think modernity as well, like your product needs to look sexy, right? Like adoption is driven by, wow, this looks fresh, this looks new, there's colors, there's bolding out, there's images, there's things like that. A lot of products that I see, frankly, they look like they were constructed in 2001, which maybe they were, but very hard to get adoption, right? Like, we're so used to our iPhones, our Androids these days.
That's true. And those are rolling out updates, to your point, like every month, there's always things being developed, which is something you look for.
Right. It's fast. It's, there's colors, there's icons. I like to call it like sexy tech.
Yeah.
Because I can't drive adoption if it looks like something that we all used at school. All those really big Macs with the big bum Macs, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's another key component. And then price. I think, to your point, like the tech bloat and the tech debt, smaller investments can be a good way to test things out. So if you want to only sign for a year and it's not like a $100,000 investment, the risk is low, right? You want to test your hypothesis out. That's okay. Make sure you negotiate the terms though, because you don't want to find yourself in a 2-3 year contract. And be open with the vendor and say, like, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm trying to achieve. I can't commit to something long-term right now, but I really want to test out your product. Would you be open to a trial? Do the trial. Still not sure. You want to test out your hypothesis. You go, okay, can I have a year?
Yeah.
I think we need to be open with vendors as well and say, this is my capacity. This is what I want to test out. No, I can't sign long-term.
Right.
But usually if you're open like that, the vendors are pretty open as well and go, yeah, totally understand. Like, let's give it a go,
Yeah. And I think from my side, it's like, have those conversations earlier rather than later too. And just say, hey, look, what's possible from our side, what's possible from your side. And is there a path there? So, because if there isn't, then we've wasted maybe 2, 3, 4 months or a year in some crazy cases to go and evaluate. Right. So that's a lot of time. So what I heard was, are they willing to partner? Do they have an open API, or can they integrate with other applications? Easy to adopt, and flexibility in terms of contractuals to a point, right?
Yeah. And then from your side, like, where does it fit? Don't just buy tech to buy tech. Like, it needs to have a space in your ecosystem that it actually fits, right? Yep. Like, this is a sales tool. It is going to encourage BD efforts without making it too manual. So it fits in this pocket, If you're just buying, I'm trying to think of something that, like, buying a chat tool just to buy a chat tool. What do you already have in your stack that may solve for that? Because tech debt's a real thing. I know a lot of people talk about it, particularly in the staffing industry, and it usually happens because you get that shiny syndrome, right? Where you go, oh, this looks awesome, I'm going to adopt that.
Yeah.
But it really does need to make sense.
Yeah. And then there's new people that join the business. It's like, well, I need this to be successful. Right. And then there aren't kind of processes for, but guess what? If they join ProCom, hey, you have to run this by Leanne before you buy something.
Exactly.
Like this and that, we have to go and do that. There was one piece, actually, the last piece, I think, what we talked about, and what's interesting, because you're a multinational organization, you're based out of Canada. There was a small piece about language there that some vendors newer vendors maybe quite haven't thought of, right? When you're evaluating tools?
Yeah, this is the Achilles heel of lots of the vendors that I speak to. So it's great that you're bringing this up. Mm-hmm. As a Canadian organization, we do need a lot of our tools, particularly if it comes to writing content or transcribing stuff, to be available in French, because the Quebec market is quite a large chunk for any national company in Canada. A lot of vendors make things for the US or make things for the UK, and then they don't have that flexibility when it comes to language. For the US as well, if you're looking for Spanish, make sure that you're asking those questions, like, does this translate? Because even though now you might not have any Spanish needs, in 6 months' time, maybe you're recruiting for some Spanish roles in Texas as an example. So you need the tool to adapt and you want to get ahead of that, right? So you want to talk to your vendors from the get-go and say, this is what I need. How easy is it for you to do that? Yeah. I hope I answered that question.
No, that's great. Those are like kind of like the got you ones, right? Where you don't really think about it, but if you have someone like yourself that's in that role, they know to answer these questions. Where someone, you know, in some of these maybe even smaller firms that are just saying, hey, I'm running these tech evaluations just because this is a shared responsibility, they might not be as like on the ball to make sure to ask those. And then all of a sudden they're in a 2-year agreement and it doesn't support the languages they need, right? So
I think as well, like my personal approach is cutting through the wish-wash, if you will, or the marshmallowism is like, let's just get to the point and understand, like, what can your tech do? What can't it do? What are you planning on improving? Are you willing to partner? Like really asking those poignant questions. I think sometimes salespeople, and forgive me, Christian, but I know your job is hard as well, but they get really into like deep discovery and ask me a lot of questions. It's like, that's what I'm there for, you know, like I want to understand what your product can do. I think sometimes we focus too much on like Leanne has a specific problem and we need to solve that for her. Not necessarily true. Sometimes you have a cool tech and we want to use it to see if it can streamline some of our operations. I hope that makes sense. But basically, I think don't get too much into discovery.
I love that. No, that advice for me. We have advice for people in staffing tech. On the staffing side, technology sales reps, please listen to this episode, right? And one last question, a fun question. I don't know if you have one off the top of your head, either worst job or interview experience as an interviewer or interviewee. You kind of have options here.
Well, I haven't really had a worse job. I'm pretty lucky in that way. I think, as I said, when I'm bored, I'm pretty vocal about it. But I do remember going through a job interview when I first moved to Canada where like the people didn't turn up or they were like 15 minutes late, I remember. And like that was really irritating. And then when they did turn up, they asked me questions like that had no relation to the job. It was a little bit strange. And then afterwards they offered me the job and I was like, well, I think values is important, right? Like if you don't turn up to a job interview on time or you're not focused about what the job actually entails, if you feel it as a candidate, then don't go for it. Like you have to live by your values. But I was like, this company, and this company is quite established here, but I was like, this is all over the place. I can't believe it.
And you didn't take it, or you did? Well, good for you. Wow. I don't think enough people would maybe do that, but yeah, that's red flags. The interview experience is a two-way street, right? In terms of evaluating who's a fit for who.
Totally. And if any recruiters are listening to this, like turn up on time. If you're running late, no big deal. Send a message. I really try
communicate. There we go. Right.
Communicate.
Everyone's human. Right? Be human.
Totally. Like I think we have to. That's the takeaway from today, Christian.
Yeah.
Like, be human. If you're running late, no big deal. Send a message. I'll be there soon. Or can we reschedule? Like I know it sounds basic, but you'd be amazed. Even some vendors that I meet with today, like they're like, you're the only person who will tell me if you're running late. You know what I mean? Like, it seems strange, but like go back to basics, right?
I know. Anyway. My dad has a company, and if he was ever 5 minutes late to a job or was going to be, he'd make a call. And most of the people would be like, "You're calling us because it's like 5 minutes late." Like, But so the standards are low, but you know, to your point, takeaways from today: be human, over communicate. And you've given a bunch of great advice to people in your role and in the industry. So thank you so much for coming on.
I had so much fun.
Yeah, and we'll have to do it again. And
we're coming for you.
I know we are. We're gonna have to have a whole podcast with all of us and
that'd be fun.
Share some stories. But anyway, have a great end of the year here. We were recording this in December for everyone who's looking. And thanks again, Leanne.
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn if anyone wants to talk about digital ecosystems more.
Yes.
I'm a tech nerd, as it says. So happy to chat with anyone who wants to.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. Cool.
Thank you.
Take it easy. Bye.
Bye.